Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, the show that is part of the Simply Luxurious Life online destination, cultivating true contentment, the art of living a life of quality over quantity. Visit the blog, The Simply Luxurious Life, at our simplified URL, tsll.co or thesimplyluxuriouslife.com to find the show notes for each podcast episode, as well as much more weekly content to elevate your everyday and deepen your contentment. From a Monday motivational post, recipes, videos of the cooking show series, style and decor inspiration, French and British inspired content, and readers' favorite regular weekly post, This and That, which is posted each Friday morning. Now to today's episode. Welcome to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. I'm your host, Shannon Ables, and whether you're listening on your commute, exercising, working in the garden, or sitting down with a hot cup of tea or a café au lait, thank you for tuning in. Let's get started. Welcome to the 315th episode of The Simple Sophisticate, and welcome to a month full of new content. We have 3 new podcast episodes for you this month as we step into the holiday season, and a lot of us are traveling to see family maybe for the first time after a year or 2, and we are maybe cozying in a little bit more in the Northern Hemisphere. If we're in the Southern Hemisphere, you are roaring into spring, and I appreciate it when you bring me on your walks and your gardening, potterings around your yard, and simply just choosing to tune in whatever you might be doing. Today, we're going to talk about love. We're going to talk about love, and we're going to talk about relationships and ourselves, but through the lens of being HSP, or a highly sensitive person. Now, if you're not HSP, you might be in a relationship with someone who is, or you might think maybe I fall somewhere on the spectrum. You may say, I'm non-HSP, but I know that it might improve my relationship, and I can guarantee it will. As we go through these steps, these are just helpful tools and ideas to build a very strong relationship. So, what are we talking about? We're talking about being in love, being HSP, and being at peace with ourselves and the one we love. But before we get to that, this week's Petit Plaisir is a documentary I watched a couple weeks ago, and it took me a couple of years to get to watching it. I've been having it on my list, my watch list. It's been popping up for years, and I watched it probably at the most opportune time to watch it, and I could not wait to recommend it to you. And I'll talk to you about that at the end of today's episode. But let's get into this topic. So I was inspired for today's episode by a book that inspired episode 44, which is one of the most downloaded episodes of this show. What was that episode? That episode was all about the gifts of being a highly sensitive person. And it was entirely inspired by Dr. Elaine Aron's book, The Highly Sensitive Person. Now, that book came out first. Then she wrote in 2001, The Highly Sensitive Person in Love, which is what inspired today's episode. And it's all about understanding and managing relationships when the world overwhelms you. Here is a quote to begin today's episode. We fall in love harder and fear it more because we are drawn to the depths and complexities of the emotions we are going to unleash. But we also know that the consequences of such deep love are unforeseeable, a situation we never relish. As many of you know, I self-identify as being HSP. I'm also an introvert, but there's a spectrum for both of those. And just because you're introvert doesn't mean you're HSP. And just because you're HSP doesn't mean you're an introvert. And it does not have anything to do with your gender. There are as many male HSPs as there are female, as Elaine Aron points out in her book. So that has nothing to do with it, although society would like to tell us different. We'll talk about that in our conversation today. Being in a loving relationship of the romantic persuasion. Now, all of the things we talk about today could apply to any healthy relationship of any sort, but she is specifically talking about romantic relationships. To an HSP, such relationships can seem evanescent or near impossible. And as I mentioned in episode 44, I detail the many gifts of being an HSP, sharing 26 awesome benefits of being HSP after reading her first book, The Highly Sensitive Person, How to Thrive When the World Overwhelms You, ushered in a breath of not only fresh air, but relief. As I felt that finally I understood what for my entire life did exist, but I could not understand it or explain it, let alone receive understanding from others who didn't get me. And many of you who listened to that episode and read that post were relieved to find that book as well. You shared that in your comments. There's great comments both on the blog and on YouTube if you want to check them out from listeners. And so when you enter into the world of trying to be one part of a healthy, loving, respectful, equally fulfilling romantic relationship, it can be really confusing when you're HSP and you don't even know being HSP exists. And I speak only from my experience, but my confusion did not dissipate after reading that first book when it came to romantic relationships. I certainly had eye-opening moments in my everyday life, and my life became much more enjoyable, and I found more peace with myself, and I was able to communicate more clearly what I needed and why. But I still fumbled in my romantic relationships. Because even though I tried my best to communicate what I now better understand about myself, I was missing a better understanding of how to first meet people more likely to mesh well with me. And I was also looking in the wrong places, misreading the indicators of my own feelings that I had relied on as my default in my pre-HSP-aware years. So I was misinterpreting what was happening. And it's not overreacting. I don't think we should be blaming ourselves when we don't understand what's going on because other people are interpreting it for us through a lens that doesn't know our sensitivities. And it's not a weakness. It is simply who we are. And there are amazing gifts to that. So I was introduced to Elaine Aron's second book, The Highly Sensitive Person in Love. I found a valuable resource in this book that translated the once foreign language of my own self and feelings, and also gave me tools. She has very specific tools in this book to successfully and more confidently move forward. In today's episode, I am going to share 10 aha moments I found while reading this book. But there are far more than 10. I mean, it was hard to narrow it down to 10, but I'd be talking for hours with you. And I really think as you go through the book, you're going to gravitate to different sections that speak to you where you are. You may be in a relationship long term. You may have just started a relationship. You may not be in a relationship at all. And she hits on all of these areas. She even talks about sexual relationships, the component that is really core to a romantic relationship, but at the same time, often misunderstood when two people don't know each other or don't know how to communicate what's going on. So there's a very intimate chapter in this book when she talks about that. I won't be talking about that because I think you need to read that through your own lens of how you feel comfortable with sex, but I'm really glad she does talk about it. She also has a Hsp test where you can kind of try to understand where you fall on the spectrum for yourself and for your partner. And she has a couple of those throughout the book. Consider this episode then a taste of what you will find in the book, which is now a highly annotated book in my own library, and one I am thankful to have been able to return to as my life journey unfolds. Like I mentioned, depending on where you are, you're going to go to different sections of this book, or read more closely certain sections of this book. So let's get into the list. Number 1, your partner does not need to be HSP as well, but it helps if they fall somewhere in the middle of the spectrum of sensitivity. With 15 to 20% of humans, quote, born with a nervous system genetically designed to be more sensitive to subtleties, more prone to deep reflection on inner experience, and therefore inevitably more easily overwhelmed by outer events, end quote. It can at first seem, if you identify as HSP, that you are alone, that you are different, that you are odd, and something must be wrong with you. First, let me just say emphatically, nothing is wrong with you. As I shared in the introduction for today's episode, you have awesome gifts. And now that you know you are HSP, you can begin to tap into them. It is also important to know there is a spectrum of HSP, just like there is with introversion. And Aron, as I mentioned, provides an Hsp Self-Test to help you find where you and your partner might fall on it as a way to provide further insight into ourselves and our partner. As well, it is important to know one gender. I just want to reiterate this again because I think it's important. Does not have a tendency to be more likely HSP or not HSP. Quote, just as many men as women are born highly sensitive, even though women are stereotyped as being sensitive to subtleties and men being tough and not noticing much, end quote. Not only is this stereotyping wrong and limiting, it is also hurtful. Yes, it's hurtful to women, but especially to men. And I speak it from someone in the American culture, but it depends on the culture, as they are essentially bullied into hiding their true gifts if they are HSP. And I know men, grown men, students I've taught, it makes it so much more difficult when you're in a culture that doesn't value the strengths you have. And we're going to talk a little bit about that today. And that's why knowledge is key, so that you can find the inner awareness and therefore then know how to communicate and also set very healthy boundaries for yourself so you can live fully and be able to be who you are and share whatever those amazing gifts you have within yourself are there ready to be expressed. Aron begins her book by talking about her own marriage with her husband, who is not HSP. However, he has many sensitivities and awarenesses and appreciations for the world around him that enable them to have many shared experiences, which they both enjoy. As you will find in the following points, a desire to understand one another and for each partner to be able to communicate and know who they are is key, as well as desiring to be part of the partnership in a constructive way without losing one's core needs to thrive. So I wanted to start there because I think sometimes we think we have to have someone who's just like us. No, we don't. And I think that's a relief because that opens up a large playing field of people we can meet and get to know. And who knows what the relationship will be or how long it will last. Maybe it'll just be a friendship. Who knows? But I think that's important to open our minds up. Number 2, one of the biggest overlooked areas in relationship self-help is the dismissal of one's degree of sensitivity and inherited temperament. Aron does temper the truth that for far too long, relationship problems dismissed the awareness of each individual's degree of sensitivity and inherited temperament by saying that, quote, relationship problems are still social, not genetic. She goes on to say, quote, the heritability of divorce only means that something about people's genetics is influencing divorce. I believe it's not our inherited temperaments that are causing trouble, but that we deal with some temperaments poorly, end quote. Now, just to clarify the difference between temperaments and personality, this is something we've talked about before on the blog and the podcast, but it does bear repeating. Temperament is something you are born with. So an HSP individual, that is your temperament. Being shy is not a temperament. That is your personality. It's caused because of the culture you grew up in and how you feel comfortable or not, or based on how people treat you. That is cultural. That is social. That is personality. They are not intertwined, and that's often something that gets thrown in to be an introvert. You're not shy if you're an introvert. Being shy can be someone who's an extrovert, has nothing to do with the temperament. Has everything to do, though, with the culture that surrounds you and what is nurtured or not nurtured in this case. So your personality is socially conditioned. Your temperament is something that's hardwired within you. And while we may not feel we can change our temperament, we first need to be aware of what it actually is. And often our personality is such a strong facade we have presented for so long, it is hard to know what our true temperament is. You really have to consciously make an effort to figure that out. But when you do, it's powerful and it's life-changing for the better. With all of that said, Aron underscores that, quote, 50% of your risk of divorcing has something to do with your genes. This makes inherited temperament a very important and neglected fact in relationship harmony, end quote. So number 2 is just being aware that one of the biggest overlooked areas in relationship self-help and marital relations is the dismissal of one's degree of sensitivity and inherited temperament. Now, she does also qualify that it is improving because she has brought this to the forefront over 20 years ago now with this book and with her previous book. And so more people are exploring it. So that's important. There is improvement out there. But depends on who the guru is, so to speak, and what they know about this subject of sensitivity. Number 3, understanding your optimal level of arousal is crucial. Quote, all organisms like an optimal level of arousal, and all day we humans make adjustments to stay there. We put on the radio to increase the arousal, take a nap to decrease it, call a friend to increase it, turn off the TV to decrease it, and so forth. We do this over long intervals too, change jobs to increase it, avoid divorce to decrease it, travel overseas to increase it, move to the country to decrease it, end quote. Whether or not we identify as HSP, as Aron states in the quote that I just shared, each of us throughout our days and our lives are trying to maintain the optimal arousal level. What must be understood about HSPs is that, quote, we get over-aroused a little sooner than others, end quote. And that is perfectly fine, even if others may try to make you feel as though something is wrong and you should push through and just deal with it, discomfort or not. No, don't buy into their ignorance or dismissal because it's more than discomfort. It is disrespecting your true nature. And if you chronically dismiss what you need, your relationships suffer because you cannot be fully yourself or at peace. This section, when I read it, I reflected on my own life and I started to look around my home, my routine, my days, and everything that I am trying to curate in my life for, how I lay out my home, what stimuli I bring into each room. It's all about what makes my day hum, just feel great, right? And it's, working with Mother Nature. I love a lot of natural light. That makes me feel so good. And I like the quiet, but I also like hearing the birds in the morning. So there's little things with regards to arousal that make a big difference. Now, some people may wake up and turn on really jazzy music, so really loud pop music, whatever the music may be. It has a lot of lyrics, a lot of words. To me, that is way too much arousal. But I know people that love that. And that is what gets them going in their day. So you need to know, and that's where you have to be the student of yourself, what works for you and figure out why. And so therefore you can, when things beyond your control happen, you can really start to listen and pay attention to yourself and handle it as best you can. Remove yourself when you have to. We'll talk about this a little bit more in today's episode, but your self-awareness is really the key to being successful, not only with relationships, but having a great day. So that's number 3. Understand your optimal level of arousal, which is crucial. Number 4, understand the culture you live in and what it values, and then don't be bullied to change. Quote, HSPs growing up in cultures in which they are not respected have to be affected by this lack of respect, end quote. This is a fantastic section to read, and I'm going to share with you one of the studies, but there's another study that I think is very important to read, and I'll provide the page number. Looking at the same study, which took place in China and then also in Canada, quote, comparing elementary school students, it was found that sensitive, quiet children in China were among the most respected by their peers, and in Canada, they were among the least respected, end quote. Aron shares insightful examples of how even science and its findings are influenced by what the culture values. And this is on page 31 and 32 of the book, bottom of page 31, top of page 32. And what I mean by this is whatever the outcome is, that's the fact, that's the outcome. But how they interpret that outcome is seen through the lens of either a very non-HSP or extroverted culture, what they value in a culture, or the other. And when you see that, you'll see certain loaded language used in the description to influence what is supposedly good or bad. Again, that's very subjective, and thus the culture plays a role. So I encourage you to read that. I share this insight of Aron's to help HSPs become aware of the media, culture, voices, and leaders that surround them, and to listen and examine what you hear, see, and witness being praised with a critical mind. If the predominant behavior in men, for example, that is applauded is to be loud, to be dismissive of feelings, and to be the tough guy, more men are going to gravitate to such behavior unconsciously, most likely, but consciously too, because of the social acceptance. We're social creatures. We don't want to be left alone. We may choose to be on our own, but we don't want to be alone by not being chosen to be part of the group. The same can be said for women. If the behavior is to be the harried mother who just deals with it and is applauded for being exhausted, but still she is put up on a pedestal for burning the candle at both ends, instead of fighting the culture, after all, they're exhausted. They go along with it because at least they're being praised. The culture accepts them. Now, I'm using two very general but also very extreme examples here, but all of it is to say, if we become aware first of our own true temperament and then of the culture that surrounds us, we can then live in alignment to our true selves. And if the culture we live in does not applaud our natural tendencies to find peace, that optimal level of arousal, right? We can find our own peace. We can create a culture and a life that works for us. And those who no doubt also exist in our culture will start to find them as well and simply wish to stand and find and give strength to each other because we understand we're not alone. There may be only 20% of us out there, but there's 20% of us out there. You're tuning in. We're part of it, or at least we know someone who is. This was a big aha for me. I stopped accepting what this culture was telling me was the norm, what was normal, and I started to ask why. And then I started to apply what I knew about myself, and my life changed for the better. I didn't feel bad, for example, for not going out on a Friday night. This was when I was younger more predominantly, but even now, I don't even think about it anymore. I mean, everything about the order of my days does not consider what the culture is going to applaud if I know it's not going to bring me peace or calm. So just take a look around, observe your culture. You're not alone in your culture if you're someone who doesn't, fit what they applaud. Guarantee that. And I think that will bring peace as well. Number 5. Establishing good boundaries is essential. First, reflect upon your own life at the moment. If you feel overworked, are constantly saying yes, but as Aron describes, quote, resent it later, end quote, you are likely not setting good boundaries. You may even occasionally put down boundaries once you become so exhausted and frustrated, but they are boundaries that are so severe that they shut off everything and everyone. So they're just too much. They don't actually help you. They're not good boundaries. Another important truth to know about the harm of not establishing good boundaries is when we haven't put them in place, we allow others to tell us hurtful, false truths about ourselves. Quote, you are weak, you're not assertive, you're insensitive, you're rigid, etc. I mean, the negativity as far as things that don't build you up flood into your life. And because you haven't said no, or you haven't walked away from that relationship, or you haven't had a conversation with that person to say that hurts my feelings when you say, then you don't have healthy boundaries. I've talked a lot about this in depth about boundaries, but also vulnerability. So finding the right balance. And I talked about it in episode 126, A Powerful Couple, Boundaries and Vulnerability. If you want to check that out to explore how to create your own good and healthy boundaries. So number 5 is establishing good boundaries is essential. Now, I have a couple sponsors, about 3 minutes worth, that I'd like to introduce you to, but I'm going to come back and share with you, I have 7 more items on this list. I'm going to give you 2 more than what I promised. I'll be right back. Bombas designed their socks, shirts, and underwear to be the clothes you can't wait to put on every day. Everything they make is soft, seamless, tagless, and has a luxurious, cozy feel. There's a pair of Bombas socks for everything you do. They come in performance styles for every sport, holiday styles for when you're feeling festive, and lots more. Bombas are the coziest gifts for everyone on your list, and thanks to their festive gift boxes, you don't even have to wrap them. All you have to do is the giving. Socks, underwear, and t-shirts are the 3 most requested clothing items at homeless shelters, in that order. That's why Bombas donates 1 for every item you buy. Bombas are made to be the perfect gift and made to give back to those in need. So happy giving. As a Simple Sophisticate listener, you can go to bombas.com/sophisticate and get 20% off any purchase during their big holiday sale. That's Bombas, bombas.com/sophisticate for 20% off. That's bombas.com/sophisticate. The Simple Sophisticate is also sponsored by BetterHelp. Is there something interfering with your happiness? Is there something preventing you from achieving your goals? BetterHelp will assess your needs and match you with your own licensed professional therapist. Connect in a safe and private online environment that's also convenient. This is not a crisis line. It's not self-help. It is professional counseling done securely online, and you can start communicating in under 48 hours. With licensed professional counselors who are specialized in depression, stress, LGBTQ matters, family conflicts, self-esteem, trauma, sleep, you're sure to find what you need. Everything you share is confidential, and it's time for you to start living a happier life today. As a listener of the Simple Sophisticate podcast, you'll get 10% off your first month by visiting the sponsor of our show today, betterhelp.com/simple. Join over 1 million people who have taken charge of their mental health. Again, that's BetterHelp, HELP.com/simple. Whether you're back in the office or still in your loungewear working from home, life's day-to-day responsibilities may be lacking or feeling they're lacking something, such as travel. FunJet Vacations is a one-stop shop for all your vacation needs, and as experts in the industry, FunJet Vacations offers customers a fast, easy, and fun way to book their next vacation with exclusive package deals to all-inclusive resorts in Mexico, Central America, and the Caribbean. For a limited time, the listeners of the Simple Sophisticate podcast can use promo code FUNJET75 for $75 off your next FunJet vacation at REU Hotels and Resorts. Whether you're looking for a family-friendly resort or an adults-only getaway, there's a REU Hotel and Resort for you. To get started, just go to funjet.com or contact your travel advisor, and you'll be out of the office in no time. Offer is only valid at funjet.com when booked by October 15th for travel through December 2021. Restrictions apply. Welcome back. Number 6 on our list is you can fall in love, and I'm putting that in air quotes, fall in love. You can fall in love and not even be in a relationship with the person. So hello, HSPs. Okay. I have put fall in love in quotes or air quotes because, quote, research shows that the longer you contemplate an object in an emotional way, the more intense the emotions toward that object will become, end quote. And I will just admit that in my early 20s, I held on to a hope for someone that while maybe it kept me out of some not great relationships, it also kept me out of living and being present with others. All of this is to say, we need to simply spend time with the person, take our time getting to know them, but also being ourselves around them is a vital thing, and not to overprocess what is being revealed, but rather just let it unfold as it will. Why? Because when we expend more emotion and more processing, we fall in love more intensely, and sometimes we fall too quickly. This is a quality of HSPs. I have a feeling many other people might do it as well, non-HSPs, but it's definitely a quality of HSPs, and it's not constructive. So I bring this to the attention of this conversation only because I've done this, and I know now upon reflection, it was so I wouldn't have to be hurt. Because yeah, it hurts when you realize that relationship wasn't going to be what you hoped it would be, but it's not as deep of a hurt as if you would have actually been in a relationship, actually been involved and cared and loved for each other. That's a different hurt. And unconsciously, that's what I was protecting myself from, because I had been hurt in the past deeply. And I was very young. So it's one of those things you don't know really why things are happening. And then you add the teenage angst and the early 20s angst to that. Your brain's still developing. There's reasons we do what we do, HSPs. And when we know why we do what we do, then we can better take healthy risks when it comes to relationships. So that's 6. You can fall in love and not even be in relationship with the person. Number 7, know where to meet a fellow HSP and how to meet non-HSPs well. As an HSP, you likely enjoy your own company and find peace in hours of solitary activities. Knowing this also tells you that you will need to go out alone in order to have conversations with other HSPs. Aron suggests going where fellow HSPs might go. If it's somewhere you'd enjoy going as well, so that's important, honor your truth. From seminars to lectures, art exhibits, heading out into nature, anywhere where you are predominantly, enjoying something on your own or quietly, they will be as well, and potentially conversations can be struck up. And make sure your conversation is genuine. Often deeper points are more appreciated than surface conversation, about the weather, for example. You might start with that, but then go deeper about details that you've noticed or appreciate about the day or about that art or whatnot. But as I mentioned in number 1 of our episode today, being in a healthy, loving relationship as an HSP doesn't mean you have to be with a fellow HSP, but you do need to know how to hold yourself in a respectful way so both in the relationship are understood. If you are amongst a group of non-HSPs, Aron suggests moving out of the group in some way and finding a way to talk to someone in a more one-on-one manner. Listen and ask questions, but remember to bring your emphatic dialogue skills, which is what we're going to talk about in point number 8, which is next. So number 7 is know where to meet fellow HSPs and how to meet non-HSPs well. So in other words, you're not probably going to connect with a lot of non-HSPs, but like I said, there's a spectrum. And so knowing how to attempt to strike up that conversation is going to make you feel more comfortable and also give the potential for finding out whether or not there is any potential for connection. Number 8, practice empathetic listening and emphatic dialogue. What do I mean by these two? I love these terms that Aron shares in the book. Studies have shown that when one person in a relationship holds the majority of the power and influence, what they want to do, what they believe is the default, neither partner is happy long term. And while it may seem emotionally easier to just go along with what your partner wants to keep the relationship steady and void of upheaval or disagreement, it is actually the best thing you can do to speak, quote, plainly, honestly, without blaming, but without flinching, your authentic truth, end quote. Thus, the definition of emphatic dialogue. You need to be an equal partner in this relationship. You will not always agree, and you need to find comfort in that discomfort. This is where you both also need to be empathetic listeners. Empathetic listening involves more than just paying attention to the words that are being spoken. Quote, the listener attends to the feelings as well as the content and does not interrupt, interpret, advise, or even offer his or her experience or ask questions, end quote. If you're looking at the show notes, I am putting this definition in bold because so often we heard the advice or hear the advice, which comes from a good place, to simply listen. But we aren't often told or shown how to do so well. I find Aron's definition to be incredibly clear and something I still practice as I make mistakes with it, but awareness of how to listen and how to do it well is the key. And with practice, we become more proficient and thus better partners in a healthy relationship. So 8 is practice empathetic listening and emphatic dialogue. 9, refrain from jumping to the wrong conclusions, i.e., don't make blanket assumptions. Here's a quote for you. Both self-love and other love increases when we don't make too many personality attributions about others and ourselves, when we recognize that people cannot be completely explained with a label such as shy, rude, or even highly sensitive, and that situations are complex, rich, often unpredictable, and infinitely interesting. End quote. In point number 4 of our conversation today, we talked about how a culture will favor one temperament over another. If you live in a culture that values a temperament you do not align with, and you have not had a support system to strengthen your confidence in your awesomeness that you are, you may have a low self-esteem, which, good news, your self-esteem can be strengthened, but awareness as to why is helpful to reverse the lack. And she actually talks about how to build your self-esteem in this book as well. I've talked about it also on the blog, and I'll provide a link. Because of our low self-esteem or negative past experiences in relationships, when a person we are interested in, perhaps we've gone on a date or two with them, hasn't called back, for example, we can jump to negative assumptions about them and about ourselves. Don't go there. Instead, do the following. Self-reflect and be honest with yourself about your own reactions. Aron suggests that maybe you actually are not as interested as you think you should be, but you are trying to make it become something it is not. In other words, take a breath, practice patience, and go on about your life. If you wanted to call them, do so. Be your true self, express your interests, but keep your healthy boundaries. This will take practice. There will be rejection by them, but also by you. But there will also be peace because you have honored who you are, communicated your feelings, and strengthened your muscle of mastering your over-arousal. She has, as I mentioned at the introduction of this show, many specific tools and examples of how to communicate, how to engage, not the actual words of what to say, although there are some actual quoted statements, and there are some anecdotal examples from actual couples that she has counseled. But that's why this book is beneficial. It's not just conceptual. It is very concrete in her examples. So I highly recommend you picking it up if this interests you at all. So 9 is refrain from jumping to the wrong conclusions. And this is not just about them. It's also don't jump to conclusions about yourself. Oh, they don't like me. No wonder they don't like me. I'm so this. I'm so that. Stop. Have patience. Take a breath. Go on about your life. Engage how you're comfortable. And then keep going. Who knows? Things take time. But not everything is meant to work out the way we think about it in our head. Moving on to number 10. How to prevent over-arousal. So we just ended the last point with the word over-arousal, so why not talk about it? How to prevent this. During times of conflict, over-arousal can often occur if we are not aware of the signs we are nearing such a state. Again, HSPs reach this more quickly. This is again where self-awareness is crucial. It is also important to note that when we reach a state of over-arousal, especially in a situation of conflict, any contribution we attempt or any new information shared is not going to be processed by us, which means, or by anyone who's over-aroused, but I'm speaking from an HSP perspective, which means all engagement is pretty much wasted energy, Aron points out. All of this is to say, knowing how to prevent being over-aroused is important. First, if you have spoken out of a state of over-arousal, maybe you've name-called your partner, for example, Aron states, with the support of research, quote, 83% of marriages last if the partners show the repair skill of saying right away, quote, I shouldn't have said that, I'm sorry, end quote. And I want to make sure I emphasize this. Apologizing, saying you're sorry, is not showing a weakness. In fact, it can strengthen relationships and build trust if the same mistake is not made again and again, meaning you listened, you observed, you noticed, and you're growing. Aron lists more than a few specific tools to avoid over-arousal, And they begin with self-awareness. Are you stressed already? Are you tired? Once you know yourself, how you are feeling in a particular moment due to other circumstances, maybe it's work, maybe it's a previous conversation, the news, etc., you can best decide if you should enter into a conversation that you know will increase your arousal and whether you have the strength at that moment to remain in a helpful state of conversation and engagement. In a healthy relationship, compromise does occur, but it is important to hold yourself in your awareness here most especially. Quote, look for every place where you can compromise or give in without feeling you have violated your own needs, end quote. And one of the most important approaches, and without it can actually cause more stress to an HSP, is to, quote, agree about when you will resume your discussion and don't put it off for too long, end quote. All of this begins with self-awareness. What do you need? Why do you need it? No one else has to approve of it, but you need to understand it for yourself. And the other part of that is you might need a break before you engage in a conversation that will eventually need to be had. But it's important for each person's peace of mind to say, we'll resume talking about this, at the end of the day. Or I just need an hour. Give me time to go walk. Have some space and time to myself. I've had a really long day. My boss was down my neck and I just need a brain break. Just be honest. What do you need? Communicate that and don't compromise your needs away. So number 10 is know how to prevent over-arousal. Number 11. All right. See, like I said, I have 2 additional points here. Number 11, take a breath and take time. Quote, HSPs in particular need time to decide about others. You need time, and if the other is an HSP that's in the relationship, that person does too. You need time together and you need time between to think it over. If you persist, love may grow or it may die, but time is on your side in that the more you know each other, the more it will be that whatever happens will be for the best. End quote. The willingness to let the relationship evolve naturally at a pace both are comfortable with can be hard in that sometimes we don't realize we are rushing due to cultural pressure or pulling back out of unexamined fear from past hurts or confusion about our feelings. Again, this is where self-awareness and a confidence in exploring our feelings and then expressing them calmly, yet with strength, as to clarify healthy boundaries, moves the relationship forward if both parties continue to be interested. We learn about each other as we spend time together in shared experiences. And when we force desired experiences, we sometimes lose the potential of what could be. This is not to say if we don't force it and if we are patient that the relationship will work out as we had hoped. We cannot know how it will turn out. But being ourselves, taking the relationship at the pace it goes, while partaking, not sitting back and letting the other person call all the shots or not call them and thus letting it dwindle away. When we partake, it is the only way to know what the next right step will be. And that's all you can do. What is the next right step? Don't plan 2 years down the road. What is your next best action? And then go about your day after you've done it. So number 11 is take a breath and take time. Last but not least, number 12, the truth of loving is especially hard for HSPs, but love anyway. Quote, HSPs especially tend not to want anything to change or die. So this message is important. In long-term relationships, you must be ready to endure the nice friendship aspect of your relationships being betrayed, perhaps through a terrible fight, in order for the passion of the self through essential spirit to be reborn. End quote. I wanted to share this particular point last. Part of the reason I know I have avoided relationships in the past, or chosen the ones I have that have not worked out, is because it hurts so incredibly much when that person is no longer in my life, or when a person that I've loved and they've loved me is no longer in my life for whatever reason. Whether in a romantic relationship or friendships and family or even our beloved pets. If we've lost any one of those that we have cared for and loved, and the love has been returned, when we lose them, as an HSP, all people feel the pain. HSPs feel it so viscerally. It's hard to describe unless you're an HSP. And that's when the walls go up. That's when the barriers go up. However, part of the reason it hurts is because we loved deeply. And as HSPs, we really do love incredibly deeply. The tools I did not have, however, in those past relationships are shared in detail in Elaine Aron's book. And I am gradually and consciously trying to use them to build better relationships with more awareness, which ultimately deepens my appreciation, holds me in the present moment, and reduces the chance of any regret when the end of the relationship occurs, whether by separation or death. That has been crucial. That has been a huge changing point in the elevated quality of my days in life with others. That holding myself in the present, savoring what is, not asking for more, but fully engaging, holding or standing in my truth, that is what I have control over. So number 12, the truth of loving is especially hard for HSPs. Love anyway. I hope today's episode has shared insights you too can use in your own life to strengthen the love you experience and bring ease as you better come to understand and celebrate yourself and the gifts of being HSP. You can find this entire list of items, number 12 items on this in this episode on the show notes, the simplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 315. I've linked to both of our books. I've also included 4 different past posts and episodes. One is the episode I mentioned, episode 44, the gifts of being a highly sensitive person. I've also linked to how to be one half of a healthy relationship and one of the more popular recent podcast episodes on relationships, 5 things to do to build healthy relationships and 4 things to let go, inspired by a book I highly recommend reading, How to Be an Adult in Relationships. That was episode 287, and I've linked to that as well. Now we have a petit plaisir to get to, and I'll be right back with that. This week's petit plaisir is the documentary The Gardener, which came out in 2018. It was a brilliant and bright late October day this last month, and it unfolded in one of the afternoons on the weekends. I didn't feel well that particular weekend, so I stayed inside, but I really wanted to be out in my garden because there were still a few more days where I could really be out there and in the dirt. It wasn't frozen yet. We hadn't had many frosts. So I chose to watch a documentary that I had long been meaning to watch. It had been on my watch list for a very long time, but I just have never gotten around to it. I just wasn't in the mood. You know how you have certain books you read at a certain, when you feel a certain way? Same thing with the films, for me anyway. And so I watched The Gardener. And this film was released in 2018, and it spotlights the vast garden des Quatre Vents, located in La Malbaie, Quebec, Canada. And it was created and designed and cared for by Frank Higginson Cabot. And Cabot was a World War II vet who brought his many travels to life on the property that was handed down to him from his parents, whose grandparents immigrated from Europe in the 19th century. And he gradually created grounds of various garden spaces that honor the gift that the seasons bring, as well as bringing in talents from around the world who helped bring his visions to life based on the climate and what would support it. Now, he passed away in 2011, but prior to his death, 2 years prior in 2009, he spent 2 whole days giving extensive interviews for this documentary. And that is what gives this film such insight into how his mind worked, what his inspirations were for each space, and why he created the conservation of gardens in 1989 here in the States. I want to show you or let you listen to the trailer for this film, and you can find it wherever films are streamed. Here we go, The Gardener.
There's a wonderful saying that the senses are the gateway to the soul. I'm never happier if I think that someone's soul has been touched by their experience here at Capturable.
When you first come to this garden, you are absolutely knocked out.
People who come to visit in those large groups, by the time they've finished, their lives have been changed.
You're never at the end of anything in Frank's garden.
It's garden theatre at its best.
I've seen gardens all over the world, but what I think is special about this is it's one man's vision. It's one soul.
It's made it a little bit eccentric, which he was, an eccentric, and a genius, or nearly a genius.
Say, for this place, the site tells you what to do if you listen. And the important thing is to listen.
The Gardener won and was nominated for all sorts of awards in 2017, 2018. And it really is more than just about a garden. So if you're not a gardener, I still recommend tuning in and watching it because he talks about the many life lessons the garden has taught him. He talks about, conserving, protecting, loving, and appreciating Mother Nature. And when we see what Mother Nature wants to do, we're more likely to want to honor and respect her. I also really appreciated the classical compositions they paired this documentary with. And one of the gardeners that he worked with in that clip spoke about him being eccentric, or that the garden is eccentric. I don't find this garden to be that eccentric. I find it to be unique because it has different areas and components. But I find it to be authentic to the man's journey based on where he traveled and what spoke to him. His son now runs the garden, and they do have a vegetable garden. His wife primarily attends to the vegetable garden, and he would plant annuals and actually perennials, I think, too, in the garden. And after a while, she had to tell him, "No more, Frank. I want my vegetables." But it was this. His ideas are just fun to see it's fun to see where they come from. His moon bridge that he created in one of the gardens is exquisite. And I included a picture of it on the Petit Plaisir post if you want to check it out, because it creates the bridge itself, the actual structure of the bridge creates the top half of the moon, and then the reflection of that bridge in the water creates the bottom half of the moon. And so it creates this full circle. It's just gorgeous. It's just gorgeous. And then all of his delphiniums, this is the time of year, winter, into fall, to watch a film like this, to really get the spark going, get ideas going for as you plan for next spring. I highly recommend The Gardener. I hope you've enjoyed this week's Petit Plaisir, where each week ideas are shared to make the everyday all the more enjoyable. Tune in at the end of each episode where I'll recommend a book, a film, a show, a recipe, anything that is a simple pleasure to satiate your sophisticated taste. And you can find details of that film on the show notes, thesimplyluxuriouslife.com/podcast 315. Before we wrap up, I wanted to share 2 reviews and send my thanks to taking the time to do so. I also want to share just a big thank you to all the listeners from last episode who said that they enjoyed the show. The voice is what they tune in for, and not to worry about the Breathe Right strips. I appreciate so much your feedback. And with that said, this particular reviewer responded and labeled the review, "Encourages a deeper, more intentional life. 5 stars. You articulate your points well and speak clearly. There is nothing wrong with your voice. Our voices are a part of what makes us each a unique being. No change necessary. Love the pod." Thank you, Dolce Lynn, for your kindness, your specificity, and for tuning in. I so appreciate your time and for taking the time to write the review. This next review comes from Brazil, from Isabella Lorraine. She wrote, amazing find, 5 stars. I was looking for a new podcast to listen to, and I'm so happy that I found this one. I've learned so much in a little while. Love it. Well, I love and appreciate those of you who have taken the time to write a review or rate this positively. I know you have a lot of things to do and so many podcasts to tune into and explore. And when you share what you love about this show, other potential listeners will discover what this show is really all about, because it's hard to put it into one paragraph on the search for podcasts. I've done my best, but we have, as you know, more than 300 episodes now, and there are many more coming, and I look forward to bringing them to you. With that said, there are 2 new episodes this month in November. Tune in on November 15th and November 22nd. As well, it's holiday season, and this year, the Simply Luxurious Life is finally bringing the gift guide far earlier than it's ever been brought to the blog. In fact, it's in 2 days on November 3rd. More than 50 items have been shopped, handpicked by me for you. A lot of French, a lot of British inspired content. Gifts for others, but also for you, for your home, for your life, for you to enjoy the holidays. All different price points and ideas. I do hope you'll stop by. And one of the items is a giveaway for the top tier members of the Simply Luxurious Life community. So if you're a top tier member, which there's a new Cup of Moments today, a video conversation, our monthly video conversation, I'm going to share with you and give away one of the holiday gift guide items that's worth more than $75. And I have one of these. I love it. I cannot wait to enjoy it as the holiday season unfolds. And I look forward to sending it to one lucky top tier member. Explore all of that on the blog this week. And I do hope you have a wonderful start to November. It's a brand new month. It's going to be great. Here we go. We've got this. Thank you so much for tuning in. Bonne journée. Thank you for tuning in to the Simple Sophisticate podcast, where intelligent living is paired with signature style. For more ideas and inspiration throughout the week, visit the blog The Simply Luxurious Life with the shortened URL tsll.co. For more in-depth exploration of how to cultivate your own unique, simply luxurious life, be sure to pick up my first 2 books. Each are available in hardback, paperback, ebook, and at Audible for audio listening. The first is titled Choosing the Simply Luxurious Life, and the second, Living the Simply Luxurious Life. And look for a 3rd book to be released in the spring of 2022. Readers can now join the more intimate Simply Luxurious Life international community by becoming members of the blog, which provides ad-free unlimited reading and access to exclusive content such as each month's A Cup of Moments video chat, tours of my home, Le Papillon, the regular monthly post, What Made Me Smile, and Saturday Ponderings, as well as the opportunity to enter all of the giveaways during French and British weeks. To stay caught up on all things Simply Luxurious, the podcast, blog post, and the cooking show, as well as receive exclusive news and an extra dose of inspiration to jumpstart your new month, subscribe to the Simply Luxurious Life's free monthly newsletter, which arrives on the last day of each month. And there's a weekly newsletter, a favorite of listeners and readers, which is also free and arrives each Friday to keep you caught up on the recent weekly posts on the blog. Enjoy with a hot cup of tea or a cup of morning coffee and stay in the know about all things Simply Luxurious. Thank you for tuning in today, and look for 2 new episodes of this podcast each month on the 1st and 3rd Monday. To be alerted to new episodes and when they become available, follow on Instagram, the Simple Sophisticate Podcast, and only the news about this show will be shared. Until next time, I'm your host, Shannon Ables. Bonne journée.